to be perfectly honest, after reading the chapter, I think it makes a lot more sense this way. Like, obviously, if you've got to this point, you're watching my review, you probably already read the chapter yourself. But, so, obviously, I'm not going to really, like, pull back on talking about the contents. For some reason, I was going to be like, I should kind of, like, gradually work my way into, like, describing what happened. But it's like, if people already have the review, then they probably have already read it. But the point is that when it came to this chapter, like, you had the stuff with what looked like Ziggy, and I was very curious as to what Mishima was planning to do with that, like whether it was actually Ziggy or it was a fake or what, because like he normally hasn't done anything like this whole reality chamber room, like their whole like VR training setup. He hasn't had anything like that where you essentially have kind of the easiest example, hyperbolic time chamber. Like you had what looked like that in Fairy Tail at one point with the celestial spirit world, but it's actually obviously in reverse, and time actually flows way faster outside. 1 day inside the celestial spirit world equals 90 days in the normal Earthline world. So it just set up of what you thought for like hearing that for a moment, like, oh cool, they're gonna have some cheat training setup. I even bring it up in the series, but they end up not doing it. And then with this, I was like, well, is he gonna maybe do it? Because it didn't seem too ridiculous. Like it was like a week is 35 days, so it's just 8 times more versus it's something, again, hyperbolic time chamber, a day is a year in transference, so that 365 like times multiplier the amount of time in there versus 8, so it's like you still get a little bit of like a cheat timer, but it's not enough to where it's just like, why don't you just always use that? Like sometimes even if you had like, say it's like, oh, we have 3 days until this event, you go in there, it's like, oh, 24 days in here, but like maybe that's not enough. Whereas like if you had 3 days before whatever an event was in, you had the hyperbolic time chamber, you turned it to 3 years, obviously a huge gap. You can still power up fairly well in the idea of just 24 days, but I'm sure I don't need to really go into the description of like why there's a big gap between 24 days versus 3 years. But right now, the reveal though again made a lot of sense, because is Ziggy could just hack into their ship as casually as this? I don't really think about it too much of like what it would mean, because I was thinking more of the VR aspect of it. But if he hacked into their system and he could just get in and do it, not at any point, but just continuously do it, that would just make the Eden Zero in such a bad spot. Because if Ziggy can just mess with their ship on the regular at any point in time, or at least, it doesn't even have to be like any point he ever wants, but just completely at a point where they're not prepared, it could just spell out like a really, really dangerous wrench in any situation that's gonna, just put everything that they have on the table, just throw it on the floor. But the chapter begins. You have, what looks to be Ziggy, but it's actually Xenolith. He makes like this weird haze going all over the area. He's actually just using it to cover up Shiki's vision. And he makes like a fake Rebecca, and he's just doing like torturous gravity thing. Like he's just applying gravity to her, like slowly crushing her, just applying that extra force that's just squishing her down, essentially, like just smashing force on soft body, squish. Like it looked pretty painful, and I'm glad it wasn't like the real Rebecca. And like I get like we weren't gonna get Xenolith actually hurting her. But like I was thinking maybe it was one of those times where it's like he's just using the VR setup to where she thinks she's in pain. Like it's more of like a mental thing, kind of like a placebo effect rather than actually doing it. And it's just like she thinks she's being hurt, like she sees like blood and everything. It just kind of gets in her head. It's just one of those kind of situations. And I was like, okay, but how is exactly that gonna play out? But it ended up just being a VR version of it, which again is just as sensible, and it makes sense. Like Xenolith is just testing him. He's just trying to kind of like get the emotional side of him riled up, figuring out what works and what doesn't. And Shiki's able to break free of the restraints, and that's one of the things that we had in the series of like, I'm curious to know what the exact reason of like being restrained like messes with your ether. I still like the idea that at least I've assumed it is. It's like the way that ether here works. It's redirecting the ether in your body, like the natural ether you have, into like different ways to kind of like just do different effects. Like it's essentially taking like this raw energy and molding it to match whatever the energy of the of like the ether related to it. It's like essentially if you had like it's like, oh well, fire ether gear looks like this if you look at it from like some super weird, like almost constructive standpoint. I don't really know how to describe it, but I think you know what I mean. Like if it looked like that, and then your ether lines got in whatever direction, so your ether is redirected and rerouted to kind of like match whatever the way that like this other ether works. So if you restrict the ether lines, it would make sense of why that like redirecting and rerouting doesn't happen. Like, and I always think of it kind of like a pipe system. Like if you have a bunch of pipes, you're trying to get water in a different setup, but if you block a couple of the areas, it could completely just shut it. So water's not going anywhere. But Shiki ends up breaking out. I'm curious if he's just fully okay with it now, like tying him up isn't going to do anything, or if it's like he now has the capability of doing it. Like it's like, okay, well, we just have to access that emotional side of you again, or that memory, and it'll end up helping you get past this. Like whatever the explanation will be of like what it is. Maybe it's just like a straight technique, or it's like I don't think it's a general power level thing, but it easily could be, because we know like in series your emotional state affects like your energy output for whatever the fictional power is, and Mishima does it especially, like he always has that as like a key component. Like, it's weird because like most of the series you just assume like stuff like when you get in that bloodlusted rage and like a character gets into rage form, it's like, oh, it makes sense. Like they just get so mad they lost control and stuff. But it's always weird. It's like Mishima always has that as part of like an actual tie to the power system. So it's like at least it's not like assumed versus like he just puts it in there. So I am very curious as to the extent of the explanation, and I'm hoping Zealand doesn't skip over it, because we don't know enough about like very specific aspects of ether gear. And like I said, like I just gave an explanation of how I think it works, but we don't know exactly how ether gear works, like in detail. We don't have like an Eden Zero data book that has like a page just describing, oh, this is how ether gear works. Like if it works like how I described it, it would say that, and then use like maybe a diagram comparison or some pictures to kind of just say like, make it easier for somebody to grasp that maybe didn't have kind of know the concept of what it is, and then explain why tying somebody up is able to restrict it. Because that was one of the big things about the weakness of ether gear is like, are they able to overcome it, or is it like all you have to do is restrain somebody and you can beat them? Because then when you get to like the bigger people, then it's like, don't even fight them, just get to the point of going and like tying them up. Like you just have everybody else distract them, get somebody in to restrain them, and then GG. Then I guess it would really depend on like maybe their base physical strength. Like you get them with ropes if they could rip through it, or whatever the variable is. It's not the same thing as like in Fairy Tail. Dragon Slayers have a weakness to motion sickness, and we found out what the reason that is. It has to do with like how their body composition is altered, and they have like dragon senses and stuff, and like they have dragon like pretty much the components like that gives us all our senses. They have a dragon version of it, and they can get overloaded because it's like a much bigger, like it's designed for a much bigger creature, but it's in a human-sized body, so it just can kind of get overwhelmed. But like when it came to that, you really have to think about in the large scale of this series, like dragon slaying magic was a lost magic, so not everybody knew that. Like people didn't even know that it was not just a Natsu thing until the Grand Magic Games when we saw Gajil, Sting, and then stated by Laxus him as well. So it's like, oh, it became a thing of the specific type of magic, and then later we got an explanation about it. But the difference between that and ether gear is there's way more obvious. It's obvious there's way more ether gear users at a way more frequent rate than there are something like Dragon Slayers, because ether gear is still like a rare thing, but we've obviously seen it's more of like, it seems way more accessible, and it's like way more like people can obtain it rather than something like a dragon slaying magic, because ether gear is a very broad thing. Like ether gear is more of like a Fairy Tail's magic rather than dragon slaying magic. Like ether gear is the overarching kind of label that's on a power system. Kind of like, you get easy comparison, you look at like One Piece. One Piece is devil fruits, and devil fruits can go in tons of different directions. Like they have their own categories, but for the most part, you have no idea entirely of what they could be just because somebody said, oh, like if somebody said, hey, this guy's a dragon slayer, you know that they're gonna like aspects about them for sure, but also you're gonna assume it's like an attribute. Like I don't need to go into like Diablos and stuff, but for the most part, you're gonna assume like an element. Whereas, like, same thing with Ether Gear or a Devil Fruit, you could say that somebody is a user of one of these powers, but that doesn't really give you any details. Like, you don't know, like, exactly what they're going to be like just because you know they're a user of this specific type of ability. So, it's nice to know that it's something that they can overcome. I am once again stating, I hope we get an explanation of why it's a thing to Ether Gear users, as well as like overcoming it. Like maybe overcoming it, it literally is just like a power level kind of statement. Like if you get to a certain level of degree of control over it, it's just maybe like the restraints they don't constrict your ether flow enough to kind of mess with it, or something like that. I don't know. But after that point, like we get a really cool moment from Xenolith as they're like kind of just doing general discussions. And I really liked that after Shiki found out it was all just fake, he goes and like flies over, clings to Rebecca because he was happy that she was okay. I thought that was a really nice moment. I'm a fan of how Mishima does his his main couple cast. Like he's always got the one male and one female as like the lead. Like the males always have more of the lead presence, but like the females are just as important. Like Ellie, Lucy, and Rebecca all clearly have key components in the story and their roles and whatnot. But I like their dynamics, and I thought this was just a really nice moment because like Shiki, we know Shiki is like very emotional, and he was very very torn clearly at the idea of Rebecca getting so badly hurt, and then just knowing she's okay. It would be like waking up from just a nightmare, and even though you know something was like a dream, you're like you're happy just to see something of like whatever the bad thing was, wasn't the case. But after that point, this panel, I was very happy about this panel, because usually when you have like a character like hype up like a technique or something, that they might kind of refer to as like that technique or something, but it's like if we don't know what it is, like just give a name to it. Very happy that he named it. Like he's like, oh, perhaps I can trust him with Magimek's ultimate technique, Black Sky. And like I read that like I want to say around noon for me, and so for probably like a good hour, I was just trying to think of like, what does that probably look like? What does it do? It probably, like, if it's his biggest technique, clearly it's going to be super badass. It's going to be very powerful, and the extent of it is going to be vast, because it's completely different. It's like when Shiki has Gravity Comet, and if like Shiki invented a new technique, and that was like his big move, we would know it'd be like, okay, well, it would be the extent of like what Shiki is, kind of like just Meteor Breaker. Meteor Breaker, just a very powerful gravity hit, but when it comes to this, like Xenolith is the one that says like it's the ultimate technique of this class, and it's not only that he invented Magimek style, but also he is a master of the gravity ether gear, and on top of that, he was one of the 12 Heavenly Knights of the Dancing Sakura, so he is a big deal. So him hyping this up is big, like very big technique. So I am hyped to see just that mentioned, and it'll be a while until we get to actually like see Shiki use it. I would assume like that'll probably be like the first time he uses it. I would assume will be in like the final battle of the whole Aoi Cosmos, maybe when he fights Shura or something. And the only thing I would ask beforehand is like, if we're not gonna see it, maybe we could get like a little bit of like a cartoony or like almost sketch style version of Xenolith explaining it. Like just imagine it kind of like almost like if you saw like a cave drawing and it's like really rough, but it's just a general description of it. Like we just saw Xenolith, maybe a silhouette of him, and then maybe he does some cool motions, and you just see I'm just envisioning when Jalal got pissed in Alvarez, and his magic just went out of control. Like he was just flexing out of control, and he like cleared out the entire sky. And so in the middle of the day, it was just the night sky, but maybe that, but black, and it just completely coats everything. And it's just maybe like a giant AOE gravity technique that like maybe like sinks in and condenses into Shiki, like a mega gravity comet. Like maybe it comes into like gravity asteroid something, or it's just something kind of like over the top and crazy. Like I don't need it to be some like super complex attack. I just want it to be kind of like a grand finisher. I love when like finishing moves and whatever like a character is like, I have to go all in. I have better pull what my big move is, and they just have something really just flashy and grand. I always love that when characters are able to just to have one of those sick, unique moves that really is tied to them. Like I'm sure anybody right now hearing me mention that is thinking of like super moves, like the ultimate finishers of characters they like, and they're like, yeah, I can agree with that. That's something everybody likes. Everybody likes when when a character has like a really cool big finisher. That's one of those things. If a character doesn't have one, I don't know what it is. It just makes them feel almost incomplete if they don't have like their own cool finisher move. And I'm hyped for seeing this regardless. But then we got kind of like a little bit of a wrap up moment, but also Laguna seemed to be kind of like hitting on Sylph for a moment, and Jin was not happy. And the thing is, not only do I clearly prefer, like, I like Jin and Sylph better, but Laguna, we know he's sus, we know he's definitely got something he's hiding, and so on top of him just being somebody in the crew that I'm not too sure about, I don't want to mess with Sylph and Jin's sister on top of that, because on top of, like I said, being like a bit of a suspect dude, now he's over here messing with this dude's sister, and keep in mind, Jin is a ex-mercenary. Like the dude can get cold, and here he is seeing some dude mess with his sister. You got to be careful with that. But after that point, because I don't doubt for a second that Jin would completely clap Laguna. Like put him in a 1v1. Jin's not crying. Like, we've only seen Jin get like emotional like that once. Jin's not gonna be that not gonna cry and fall into that tier hacks. He's just gonna be all in, fucking moves on and start slashing Laguna. I don't think Laguna would last more than a few minutes against like a serious Jin. Because on top of like the general like display of Jin, we know that he has that step right before overdrive when his ether lines start like moving off of his body and start kind of like really flexing out. So he's on top of being like at that level of power where he's at the step before overdrive. That means he's also near overdrive. So you better watch the fuck out, Laguna, man. Come on. But after that point, we get a moment of Xenolith bring out like a bottle cap, and I guess it's like one of the relics that is tied to Mother's ether. And they're bringing up like the last thing. What was it? The candle, like the candlestick or whatever it was, candelabra. I don't know what exactly it's called, but or sorry, yeah, they said that a candelabra or whatever or sorry, a forester. They found the bottle cap. I was reading that weird, and then the candle thing on Red Cave, and they're bringing up that it used to be a size that those are things that like are more human size, and like, oh well, maybe people live on Mother, or maybe they used to. I mean, I'm just gonna make the assumption that Mother used to be human, and I'm so curious as to what exactly Mishima is gonna reveal with that, because if it turns out that Mother is, that there's two options. Either Mother will be someone really important in the lore that became, a space deity, or she's gonna end up being somebody like tied to the main cast, like somebody that we wouldn't expect. Like, I don't really know how to say, because I don't think it would be Rebecca or anything that just becomes a god or something at some point. Who exactly knows what ways in the future? I know Mishima has teased a little bit on the information of Mother, but I don't really know how I would feel if it was like I said, like one of the main cast people. Like, I feel like it would be better as like maybe some character in an old story and like how she became this big space lady. But after that point, there's a moment between Xenolith and Rebecca, and I like that part where he's like, the girl captivated by gravity, and she's having like a bit of a tsundere moment about Shiki. I like that. Again, I like the dynamic between these two characters. You have just the way that Shiki is, and then Rebecca just having these random little Soon moments. But he says that her ether powers are weak, while still bringing up, like, quietly, to him, it's like, but the most special, not to change the world. And we know Cat Leaper, time-based abilities, and whatnot. So, that was just a really cool kind of hype moment. I like that she herself isn't that powerful, but she has, like, a really good ability and the potential to become really powerful. Like, we already know, like, we've seen the displays of her ether gear, very, very good ether gear. And I'd kind of be okay if she herself wasn't, like, very powerful, but she had, like if she had more of her redos in time and, like, just was able to use it in different ways. Like, if she's not just straight, like, kind of like, when you see, like, Shiki or Jin, and they're just raw powerful, or like what Wise is capable of if you give them machines and whatnot. If Rebecca's more tied to just the level of moves that she can think of with her ether gear, and like the way that she can just kind of utilize it, I think that would be a really nice way to balance it too. I mean, it can easily become just like super broken OP. Like, we'll see. Mishima always sets up his lead characters to become really strong, like Haru, Ellie, Natsu, Lucy, Rebecca, Shiki. Like really crazy. Like Lucy's still on the way. Rebecca's already got like a time power, so hers is very much easier to see where it can become. But after that point, there is a moment between Rebecca and Witch. I actually liked the scene because like when I saw Rebecca and Witch, and they're like in the Eden Zero like big bath. What's funny is like it started out like Rebecca and like she's just doing her thing. I was like, oh, she's just hanging out, trying to boost up her ether and stuff. And when I saw Witch, regardless of like you have this like little scuffle moment, they're both like naked in the bath. I was much more hoping that there was going to be a noting of her mask because I actually really like that Witch is completely fine in her appearance as long as she doesn't show her face. She seems to she only is embarrassed if she's not wearing a mask. I actually just really liked that as a character trait, and I was happy that that was just as a little bit near the end. Like it's really funny because you had very clear both story progression points in there, and you had some obvious fan service stuff in there. But I was way more hoping like, please just mention it, and they actually did with the whole mask part. I like that a lot. But the point that obviously it's all relating to is that she's going to end up training Rebecca, and she says she's going to make her a chrono witch. So essentially, like, she's going to help her become way more of a fighter with her time-based abilities. So again, very curious of how that's going to go. How is she going to utilize it? Because right now we've only seen her use it to heighten her speed through time dilation and stuff, and then she has her reversals in time. Is she going to become maybe kind of like Ultier, where she could also just kind of like target and attack, and then either make it go back in time or make it go forward in time? Because that would be really cool, and I'd be very curious to know the extent of how she could utilize it again. But I was gonna say just go into like the dangers of having a crazy time based person. Mishima is one of the people that I definitely trust because he's been doing time shenanigans since he started being a mangaka. So he definitely knows the ins and outs of keeping time in the story without it just becoming too much or becoming like a problem to control like within the plot. Because if you don't have rules for time travel and time based abilities, it can easily just kind of get out of hand. But I believe Michelle will be fine with this one. Either way, I am hyped to see that Rebecca is going to get trained as well, and she's going to become more capable of a fighter and be able to, provide more to the team. And I'm happy to see Witch involved as well, because I like her character too. And I was happy about the mask comment at the end. Other than that, though, like it was a pretty solid chapter. Like we got a good couple chunks of different stuff all around with like the cast and characters. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get just like a little snippet of whatever the characters are all training on up and coming. Like clearly in this chapter we have Shiki. Shiki was able to break out of being restrained with his while still using his ether gear, the whole stuff with the black sky, and Rebecca is going to be trained by a witch to become stronger. And like, I thought the term Chrono Witch was pretty cool, or witch time, whatever it ends up being in the officials. But yeah, I'm hoping that the other characters get to do that too. Like maybe Jin and Wise team up, and it's like, hey, I can help you upgrade your parts, and then Jin could maybe show him like more about like machinery, because we know Wise it says he does it more through like feel and not as much through knowledge. And then just everything for like the cast. Like I'm hoping there's something for each of them that it's like what they're going to be working towards. But anyway, other than that though, I was happy with this chapter. I really enjoyed it. I thought this was a really solid chapter. These are the kind of like setup chapters that I think are the most productive, where it's not just like, hey, we're going somewhere. It's setting up like it's setting up goals and content behind the characters to look forward to them eventually achieving and stuff. But anyway, other than that though, comment below, tell me your thoughts about this chapter. A little longer than I thought it was going to be, but I definitely had more to talk about in this chapter versus like if there's a fight chapter and it's more about the action and like how characters are getting around stuff and figuring out situations. But like I said, other than that though, comment below, thumbs up the video, but friend the like button, subscribe button, and check out my other videos. But other than that, I appreciate everyone who's already subscribed, and I thank you all for listening. Bye.